Hello everyone, welcome to today's webcast. Thanks for joining me today. We'll get started momentarily. Just a couple announcements. This is always recorded. Our webcasts will be available on YouTube within about a day. It will take questions, certainly during the webcast if they're quick, but if I don't get to them right away, I will answer them at the end of the webcast. So don't be shy, submit your questions, comments, thoughts about what we covered today. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. A few more people trickling in. They can join when they arrive. Welcome to today's webcast on new features in Civil 3D Label Genie. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Civil Product Manager here at CTC, and I am excited to show you lots of the new stuff we have coming out in Label Genie. If you're not familiar with what Label Genie is, this is one of our flagship tools, very recent released tools from CTC for Civil 3D users. And what we are doing with Label Genie is we are automating the vast majority of your annotation, your labeling across your project. This could be basic AutoCAD annotation or Civil 3D annotation. Works with your standards, so whatever kind of styles or fonts, whatever kind of branding you have for your sheets, Label Genie works with all of those. And it's not just a per drawing kind of thing. You've got a long plan and profile sheet set. We can label 50 sheets at once based on a configured label standard. I've done a series of webcasts in the past on this since Label Genie came out a couple months ago. And the release we have coming up in a few weeks has nearly double the features as what you guys have seen thus far. So if you haven't used Label Genie yet, just a quick overview of what it is, and then we'll get into some of the new features. This is the interface. You start by selecting some drawings that you want to lay out or label within. You can label current drawings. You can include additional drawings. You can limit things by layouts. Certainly you can include XREFs. So Label Genie will read into your base files, labeling that geometry as you tell it to. You choose a label type as well as a view type. So one of the things we have coming in this new release is profile and section view labeling in addition to plan view. You then choose your anchor object. So something like pipe network labels, well, that could only anchor to pipe networks. But what about mtext? Well, that could anchor to all sorts of things. You have a formatting tab that varies depending on the type of label and the type of anchor object. See here, I can pull alignment properties, populate that into any kind of label I choose. Once you set all that stuff across those two tabs, you click the Add Update Labels. Notice it doesn't just say Add, it says Update, and that means that Label Genie will refresh your label sets. So as you go and make a design change, the geometry changes, you add more objects, you simply run Label Genie again, and it'll update all those labels, be it their positioning, the number of labels, you name it. And to aid in that workflow of basically being able to adapt as your design changes and refresh your labeling, you can create templates that you can simply select from a drop-down, you load them, hit add, and boom, everything as you defined on both of these tabs, the drawing and the formatting tab, that'll execute. So it makes it very nice to repeat things from one drawing to the next or from one project to the next. From a standardization standpoint, it makes it really easy to have all your plans look the same. And obviously from a time-saving standpoint, big gains there. So what are some of the new features? I'm going to go over them briefly here in PowerPoint, and then I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and highlight some of them. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. There are so many things. We have literally over 100 different labeling scenarios in Label Genie with this upcoming release. And so I just want to give you a taste of a few based on what I've heard from people and what they're most excited about. or really just to put some things in front of you guys and get you thinking about all the different ways you can label with this. So the view types, the current build, it's just plan view. We've added profile and section views. The label types, we used to have this many different label types. That's nearly doubled now, including a variety of more Civil 3D and AutoCAD label types. The anchor objects, that list has nearly doubled to include just about every reasonable anchor object you might want to attach labels to. So some basic AutoCAD stuff, but also more Civil 3D objects as well. And then the data sources on the formatting tab, you can choose what is populated in your label. Now, if it's something like a surface spot elevation label, well, that's just going to label whatever you set up in the label style. But what if it's an M text or an M leader? Well, then you have to tell it what kind of information to populate, right? If we're going to generate 500 M liters at once, what kind of text should go in there? And we can read that information from the anchor objects. Currently, we can read AutoCAD fields from those objects, which is really handy, but we've expanded this out to include just about any kind of metadata you might have embedded in your objects, be it block attributes, user-defined properties, Civil 3D property sets, or GIS object data. If you are familiar with our Data Wizard tool, which is project-wide QTO, and automated custom legends, all that same stuff that's supported there is now going to be available in Label Genie in the upcoming release. A few other things to mention. The fields that you create that I was just talking about, there's detailed customization on them now. Conversion factors, if you want to converting something from square foot to square yards. If you want to populate suffixes, what is the precision, all that kind of stuff, you'll have detailed control on it now, much as you would in building a field manually, but now we can do it all at once across hundreds of labels. Civil 3D label overriding or appending. If you're familiar with Civil 3D labels, you can pick on one and there's an edit label text option. And you can go in there and you can manually type some additional text, perhaps a little prefix, or maybe you want that label object, but you just want to get rid of that parameter altogether. We're going to be able to do that en masse through Label Genie now, where we can override a Civil 3D text component, and we can append or prepend or just outright replace that field. Object orientation on surface spot elevations, a lot of customers waiting for this. We can orientate our surface spot elevations as well as a variety of other point type labels to rotate relative to the object itself. So if you want those spot elevations to be perpendicular or parallel to a polyline or a feature line, what have you, it will do all that for you. We can use blocks as labels now. And within those labels, if you have attributes, Label Genie will autofill those attributes. So we can take properties from Kogo points or polylines or alignments or anything. We can automatically insert blocks across those objects and then tell it which attributes within those blocks get filled with what kind of metadata from my anchor object. We've got surface contour labeling. The point-by-point contour labeling in Civil 3D is decent, but when you're trying to blanket a whole site, a lot of the tools in there are quite limiting. And so in this upcoming build, you'll see that as well, a really enhanced surface contour labeling. If you're trying to insert a counter across your labels, perhaps it's lot numbers and M text labels, right? And you're going to label 100 lots at once, and you want it to start at a particular number and then count those all up based on a defined lot order. You're going to be able to do that. Kind of like how you would rename Civil 3D structures, right? And you can kind of insert a next counter there. We're going to be able to do that, but it'll be really open-ended. We can do it in and M leaders and M text, D text, you name it. And then a variety of stability enhancements will come out with this as well. Label Genie has been pretty stable, as we found with a lot of the customers using it so far. But we're doing a lot of different things in there. Like I said, over 100 different labeling scenarios are going on in there. And so we want to make sure it's compatible with all your drawings, all your projects, all your standards. So with that, I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and start going over just a sample of some of these things. Now, one of the big things I mentioned is we can label not just in a plan view situation, but in profile or in section. And so I want to give you a taste of some of that. Now, a lot of this labeling is automated for us. So we're not recreating things like profile label sets, okay? If you project some COBOL points to your profile, you have opportunities there to assign a label. Okay, so we're not recreating some of that stuff that arguably works very well. But what about when we have to do some manual drafting in our profile views? Or what about pipe network labeling? I did a deep dive on pipe network labeling in both plan and profile last week. And I'll touch on that here again, just because we're covering a lot of the options here in today's webcast. But let's start with some of these basic things. Like I've got some blocks in here, polylines that represent perhaps vaults or junction boxes or whatever you guys might be showing in your profile view. I just want to give you kind of some ideas on what you might be able to do. So we're going to be able to label this stuff all at once across any number of profile views. So it works like this. Let's do some profile view labeling. And as I go through here, I'm going to kind of highlight some of the things that we touched on in the intro, for those of you who aren't very familiar with it. So over here is the drawing selection. I'm going to label just the current drawing, but again, we could choose multiple drawings. We could label XREF data, and we could even limit it to particular layouts. What I'm after here is a label type of MText. Again, here's all those new label types that we see. A couple of the ones I mentioned, like contour labels, they're not in this beta build I have right now, but they'll be, they're just being wrapped up in development right now. Let's do multiline text. We're going to assign it in profile. So this is a new field, the view type here, since the previous release. We're going to assign it to profiles. And what you'll now have the option for is some layering or object naming or whatever it is you want. You can filter which profile views you're going to label. I'm going to choose it by layer. So it's going to grab every profile view that's on that layer, but I could filter by style, by object name, you name it. If I click the check button here, it tells me it found 8 profile views of this type. I'll hit OK. Next, I'm going to label polylines. Here again is an expanded list. Now you'll see the entire list of anchor objects when you choose something generic like MText, whereas when you choose something like surface spots, obviously the list is a little bit more trimmed, or if it's pipe network labels, all you can label is pipe networks with that, obviously. So we're going to anchor this to, let's say, polylines. And the polylines we're after, we want to look at these polylines right here. And all I want to do is insert a piece of MText, the centroid of all this stuff. Pretty basic stuff, right? But it becomes very kind of pick and click intensive. And so Label Genie really solves this stuff quite easily. I can pull all kinds of information from those polylines, or I can simply just put a piece of custom text in here. And then down here, because this is MText, I have a whole myriad of different formatting options. I've got my style. Let's choose a text size, 0.1, display width, 0.1. And the beauty of this is you can run this stuff, and if you don't like how it looks, you simply run it again and refresh it. So let's hit add to this. It's going to tell me 32 labels. I'll hit yes. Okay, if I zoom in, now I see these labels coming in. Now perhaps that was the wrong size. Let's click this again. Say it was to be 0.2. Simply run it again. I get my different size. Okay, and it's doing this across all of these profile views. Now these are just drafted objects, and these are just mtext. There's nothing proprietary about these objects. Okay. But if you move any of those objects we're labeling, you simply run label Genie again, and it will update that stuff. Let's look at if we've inserted some blocks in here. Okay. And I'm just giving you a couple examples, blocks and some polylines, but this works for any drafted object you might have in your profile view. Let's do mtext on blocks this time. And instead of this layer, we'll grab blocks on this layer. We'll set it at the centroid. And now one of those other things I mentioned in the intro was additional data sources. Turns out these blocks have invisible attributes in them. Now maybe there was a reason I didn't want to show those in the blocks themselves, but that data is now available here. And if I had other information like Civil 3D property sets, object data, or user-defined properties, those would show up in this same way. So I can take this and I can build the label how I want. So maybe I put the type in there, and then below that I add the size. Okay. So this scanned based on this layer over here. It scanned the blocks it found on that layer, and then it populated this list saying this is the data that we could use to populate the label. And then coming down here, again, choose some of the formatting. Maybe this should be 0.1 on this. Let's click add. Yes. There's that text coming in. It's reading the attributes within the blocks. So that's why some of that is varying. Maybe you wanted it centered a little more in the box area. Come in here. Just grab your Y offset, push that up a little bit. Okay. Things change. You have additional objects that get created. Okay, you simply run it again. That label scenario, if it's the last one you ran, it's going to be saved right there. So just run it again, hit yes, and now it picks up that additional block. The templates I was mentioning, this isn't a new feature. This has been in there since the initial release. But we could save this out. So I could say new file, save, and we'll call this mtext on junction boxes in profile. And save that out. That's now available in a dropdown. Okay, so as I save out those different templates, they'll appear in this dropdown. I can choose them, simply load them, and then it will populate this info for me. Okay. Now, where those templates save, by default, they save to the path you have set up in your options. You could save them elsewhere. So a good practice would be saving this out to a network location where multiple people can use these different templates, or some other way that you make them available to other users, because you guys are working on the same projects. You certainly have some of the same standards for a given client. If someone built a template that works for a particular labeling scenario, you want to be able to execute on that easily. Now, you don't have to use the templates. It's pretty easy to come through here and spell out what you want your label to look like. But where it's appropriate, you can do that. Again, it did it across all the profile views. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the different label scenarios we can do in profile view. I will mention one other one, and that is the pipe networks. And so that can be often pretty kind of label intensive as well. So let me touch on pipe network labeling. Again, there was a deep dive last week. Just going to touch on it briefly here because it supports some of the new functionality around profile and section labeling. So I'm going to choose pipe network labels. And again, the reason we bake this in here is that you often have many different styles for a given structure type, for a given utility type, a given pipe type. right? And you have to pick all those and kind of change all that. But what we can do in here, I'm going to go ahead and grab and delete all my filters. Now what this is going to do is it's going to find all pipe networks in whatever profile views I specify. I'm going to choose this profile view right here. We can choose it by style, we can choose it by object name, for example. So now that's a unique profile view if I want to label just this one. Now you can use things like asterisks so that it would grab everything that started with that alignment name. If you're ever unsure what your filter is giving you, you can click on check and it'll tell you one profile view. That looks good. Let's go to the formatting tab. Pipe network labeling is all about your parts list. You build those out to your specifications, what you guys need. What Label Genie does is allow you to import your parts lists into here with all their customizations, and then you can assign the different styles you need for the pipes, for the structures, for both plan and profile view. So I might have existing pipes, like some of these grade pipes and structures here. I've got sanitary pipes, I've got storm pipes and structures. And oftentimes we want different symbology, different fonts, you name it, to symbolize those different utility types or different states, proposed or existing. So I've got spelled out a variety of different labels for proposed and existing. If I go to my structures, I've got catch basin, manhole labels, okay? All of it's spelled out in here, and it's spelled out for storm and sanitary. My structures over here, okay? Again, I did a deep dive on it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but basically you can map out your label styles based on your parts list. Simply run this in your drawing, all networks at once or just one at a time, and it works like this. I'm going to hit add labels. We've got a lot of stuff going on in this profile view. I'll hit add. It's telling me 52 labels. It's going to create. I'll hit yes. Okay. And all my labels come in. Now, what's different about this from the native command? The native command, what do? We pick one pipe and we can add it to entire, network profile or entire network plan. And the problem is what? It gives the same label style to every pipe and the same one to every structure. When in fact, for sanitary, I might want this kind of symbology, and I want it on the bottom half of the profile view. For storm, and maybe I've got different symbology. For existing, I want italic text. Okay, you have your standard defined, right? What we're doing with Label Genie is allowing you to just simply map that standard so that when it comes time to labeling, it's just a few clicks and everything is done, with the exception obviously of some drag state. So, but Label Genie will respect drag state. If you drag this label out of the way and then you run it again on these pipe networks, it will respect that and not reset it. Similar thing in plan view. I'll just run this quick for plan view because pipe networks are a new one. We'll grab plan up here. Okay, all my labels are mapped. I'm going to do all my networks. I'll hit add labels. 70 labels in plan view, all uniquely mapped based on storm, sanitary. Here's that again, sanitary labels versus storm structure labels. I think you get the idea. Let's look at sections. Sections are quite similar to profile views, right? They're these grid objects, and then we can add all kinds of objects to them. But many times things fall short if we're talking about drafted objects like this. So let me show you a couple examples like this, but in section view. It works almost the same as it is here. I just want to give you guys a taste of it. So maybe there's some underground duct bank or something that in my section views. And I didn't show it with pipe networks. If I was doing the pipe networks, there's some labeling automation we can do there. But oftentimes, again, we're using drafted objects like this. And if you guys aren't familiar, a few years ago, Civil 3D was updated to when you move a section view around, it's aware of the drafted objects in it. In this case, it's just some hatching and polylines. So turn that on in your section view style, and it'll be aware of any drafted objects in there. Let's launch Label Genie. We'll go and let's do some M-text. This is where Label Genie is great. There's so many shortcomings with labels in Civil 3D, and so you end up using just a basic text component, yet it's super manual, right? So Label Genie, among all the other label types, especially with M-text, takes it and makes it like a really smart Civil 3D label that can insert all at once. So we're going to do multi-line text on polylines. We'll grab section views, and now I have an option to filter by, we'll choose the layer that my section views are on. I click check, there's 31 section views. I'm going to label this all at once. We're going to go to the centroid on those polylines. And again, I've just got some custom text I want to call out here. Maybe I wanted 2 lines. Can put in a line break in there. Come down here, I've got control on, again, the display height, go 0.05. And let's make sure our background mask is on. We've got hatching there. We want to make sure to mask that. I think I've got it set right. We'll hit add, update labels, 25 labels across all those sections at once. Okay. Do one other thing here in sections, and we'll move on to some of the other new features. Let's do blocks like we had done. But now we want to grab blocks on, we've got some of these junction boxes. I can check, there's 24 of those across my section views. And insert these at the centroid. And here those block attributes show up again, or maybe it's just custom text I want to show in this one. Either way, junction box, whatever, however you need to call this out. And I want to put this over the top of it, inside the block, but let's say we want to go over the top of it. So depending on where my insertion or my centroid is, I might have to put that up a little bit. I'll turn my background mask off. We'll hit add, 14 labels. See how that looks. There we go. Okay. So questions that you guys might have about this. Again, there's many scenarios. I'm not familiar with all the different things you guys run into, what you have to show in your profile views and your section views. Again, Label Genie isn't replacing things like standard label sets or labels attached to projected objects. Okay, it's all these other things where you're having to do the manual work. So let me know if you got any questions about that. Lots of different ways we can do this. Or if you don't have a question, I challenge you, think about it a little bit. Where do you spend time? If you have big cross sections as a part of your projects, what part of that can be time consuming when it comes to annotation? Think about where Label Genie would fit in. Let's move on to another situation, perhaps in a subdivision scenario. What I want to be able to do here is insert a custom block that calls out the area, and it's kind of a little label for my block here. Excuse me, for each lot. And I in fact have an attributed block that I like to use. for this. This one right here. Okay, meets my standard. Okay, and I want to get that in the centroid of every lot. Okay, unless you're using parcel tools, which come with all sorts of different headaches. A lot of us like to stick with basics using polyline geometry, but it gets very tedious then to label this stuff. So let me show you a scenario where we can use blocks as labels that read information from a different anchor object. In this case, it'll be closed polylines. Now, this scenario could be applied in so many different ways. You want to read information from alignments, from Kogel points, you name it. We can insert blocks into all sorts of different objects. So my label type is going to be blocks. I'm going to do this in plan view. And if some of this interface seems kind of complex to you, we've designed it in such a way that it's just kind of a series of questions. Well, what do you want to do first? Well, I know I want to insert blocks, okay? And where do I want to do this? I want to do it in plan view. What's my anchor object? Well, that's going to be polylines. Okay, well, which polylines? I can come into here and choose layer or layer description. I can pick in the screen those polylines, okay? Those are on that layer. Now, where do I want to anchor this? I could attach things to the vertices. Maybe I want to insert blocks to call out all the property corners. We could do that as well. But I want to insert a block in the middle here. And if I choose the block definition down here, so this is that one that I brought into the drawing. This is one of the new features in the formatting tab where attributed blocks, their attributes will become customizable in terms of what information you can populate and automatically write to those. And what information you write, that's based on your anchor object. So in the area attribute, I want to read the polyline area. Seems pretty straightforward. What about the type attribute? Maybe there's nothing from the polylines. I just want to put in some custom text there. The type of lot it is, okay? I did mention one other field type. It's going to be next counter. I don't have that in this build here, but a third thing would obviously be lot number, and we could auto-populate that and would count up for us as well. That would work in the same way. Let's go back to the area field. Another one of the features, you guys have been using some of this data contents field here. But what about the formatting of it? That's important, right? But if you double click on this, you get a field customization dialog box. And now I get to control things like the formatting. I want it to be decimal. I want the precision to be this. And I don't want it in square feet. I want to convert that to square yards, or maybe acres, or whatever it is. You can put that conversion in here. You can even put a suffix, okay? However you want to call this out, you can do that in here. An additional formatting as well down there. Now the type field, that's just text, so there's not really any customization to happen there. It's just plain text. Then coming down here, my layer options. Should this be annotative? Is there additional scaling I want to apply? How should these things orientate? Should it be to the object or to the view? And should there be any net rotation after the fact? I'm going to click Add Update Labels. It's going to be 125 labels. I hit Yes. Okay. If I'm inserting all these blocks at once with a hard-coded field, and then it's reading area values. See how these areas vary here? It's reading from those calls polylines. Okay, it could be read from anything. Okay, but that's another creative way. Think about all the different label styles and label types you have. Oftentimes those Civil 3D labels won't quite do it. A block, you can create anything in a block, right? And if you put attributes in it, now you have fields in there that we can auto-populate with Label Genie. I want to touch on one little feature that was added, and it was more control on rotations and orientations of point type labels, namely spot elevations. So let me run this. I've got a subdivision grading plan here. And what I want to do is call out the spot labels at every one of these lot lines, not just at the ends, but at the grade breaks as well. If I run label, Genie will choose spot elevation labels, the label in plan view, and the label feature lines. The feature lines we'll use, it will be the ones on this layer. Again, you could filter by site, any number of other things. The anchor point, we'll choose the vertices. We'll do everything but the midpoints. So endpoints, high and low points, we're going to choose all that. And my surface, this is going to be I got that right. There we go. That one surface will come through. That's what the surface spot elevation labels will read from. So the anchor object is horizontally where it's going to insert. But obviously the data itself, the surface spot elevation label, that reads from a surface, and so you can spell that out here. Then on the formatting tab, I choose my style, my marker style. Then here's some of the additional formatting options that have been built out: layering options, rotation options, and then the orientation. We can now rotate to object. I can choose to rotate the marker as well. Okay, now 0 degrees, if I leave this at 0, this is in line with the object or the segment, the going forward segment from the vertex. Okay. I'm going to leave that at 0. We can make a couple of updates after the fact once you guys see what it creates. I'll hit add. 594 labels, we'll hit yes. And all those labels come in oriented to the lot line. Well, maybe you don't want it like that. Maybe you want it at a 90 to that. Simply type in 90. Maybe you didn't want to rotate the marker. You can always change this stuff. It'll update all these labels. Okay, however you label your stuff, Label Genie will handle it. Now, I did some deep dives on grading for, labeling for grading plans in the past. So obviously another common application here would be some slope labels. And that would work just like this, calling out all these slopes. So station offset labels, any kind of point label like this, they'll have this object orientation option now. So we can rotate toward or relative to the object. We can also rotate relative to a viewport or relative to WCS. See what I mean now when I say hundreds of label scenarios, right? Just about anything you do, if it's more than inserting a few labels, it becomes time consuming. That's where Label Genie is meant to come in. Let's look at a new label type we added. What about just calling out alignments? You can put segment labels on here, but maybe you want like a leader with a call out, okay? We could use M leaders, or we could use Civil 3D general notes. Those general notes they're nice because they behave like a Civil 3D label, but they're kind of limiting in terms of populating the text, right? It's M leaders are actually nicer to work with. Either way, with both of them, you're typing in the text. So let's say we just want to call out this alignment with some leaders and a text. So let's use general notes. That's a Civil 3D label. A lot of folks don't use it, but I want to highlight it here because I think it becomes more powerful with inclusion of Label Genie. We're going to use general notes. We're going to label alignments. And we'll choose alignments on this layer. And we're going to label the vertices. Let's jump in here. Let's just label all the vertices. And then because this is a Civil 3D label, typically they have a component in them that dictates what it's labeling. That's no different with general notes as well. So here's that additional feature I was talking about where you can override a text field. Okay, we could have done this in the surface spots, like maybe you want to prefix that with something unique, but you don't want to put it in the label style itself. You just want to do it for those instances. That we could automate that using override text field. Or when we're using general note like this, we could simply click override and replace, grab the alignment name, and that'll insert into the text field of the general note. I can orient this to, let's say, WCS in this case. The layering here, I didn't touch on that yet, but you can default to drawing settings. So those comes from the object layers tab in your drawing settings dialog box. I can use current or any other labels, layer that I might have in my drawing. Okay, I'll click add to this. 16 labels, hit yes. And all those labels come in. Now a general note comes in like just a fairly basic non-leader type label. So with Label Genie, you might have seen X and Y offsets. And what these will do is put things into drag state automatically for you, right? So maybe you want it to look like that, and that's great. But maybe you want it to be dragged off in a leader in kind of a standard way. So let's do that instead. We'll give it 5 and 5 for an X and Y offset. And we should see these all jump to a drag state. There we are, all of them. We're pulling the field from the alignment. This one's called Evergreen. This alignment up here is called Blueberry. Okay, so it's reading that alignment name. Maybe you wanted a little bit more offset. Simply run it again. Let me touch on one other new label style we have in here. It's a basic AutoCAD one. It's dimensions. Now, depending on your plan, you might have some fairly intense dimensioning to do. Either way, if we can take a 10-minute job, 60-minute job, turn it into a few seconds or just a minute, it's money in the bank. So what about labeling some geometry like this, calling out dimensions along all these walls? Or it could be anything. It could be geometry along concrete pads, you name it. Let's take something like this. Now I want to dimension this whole thing. Normally it'd be snapping around this whole thing. Okay, with Label Genie, we come up here, we have dimensions. Now, dimensions are a plan view thing. And just to show a new anchor object type, we're going to label survey figures. This is an existing conditions plan. I want to call out some of the dimensions on this. If I go to the Formatting tab, choose my style down here, Standard. And then we have X and Y offset. Okay, now if I orient this to Object, X and Y now becomes relative to the segment it's labeling. Okay, so if I'm looking at this segment over here, Y is to the right over here. Okay, so if I want to bring that outside of the building, I specify a positive Y, or depending on the direction that that geometry is drawn, maybe it's negative Y, basically to drag that dimension out. Okay, the X offset will slide the text left and right along the dimension line. This will bring it perpendicular away from the dimensioned object. So let's hit add update labels to this. We should see labels added to this entire one here, 35 labels. and everything dimensioned automatically for us. Okay, so this is that 5 feet from the building face out to here. Okay, so are you in situations you're doing a lot of dimensioning? You know, if it's a one-off pick and click, you know, just use the native tool, right? But if it can be fairly tedious like this and it's repetitive, Label Genie will save you a lot of time on it. So that's all I wanted to show you guys today. A lot of other features in there. Don't have time to go through all of them, but I'm going to continue to highlight this stuff in new webinars, as well as videos on our YouTube pages. A question came about, where can I find the link to this video and previous recorded webinars? If you signed up for this webcast, you'll get an email with the link either later today or tomorrow. It'll bring you to our YouTube page directly to that video, okay? Or you can go right to YouTube, search for CTC software, and you will find all of our videos where you can learn how to use these tools in different ways, or just kind of get exposed and find ideas on how you might use them. So if you're wondering how you get some of these new features, Label Genie, it's already part of the Sim project suite, okay? These new features are going to be all available in a few weeks. We're going to be releasing right around the virtual AU time, maybe right that week or a week or two after. It kind of depends on when we wrap everything up. If you're a current license holder of the Sim project suite, all these updates, just simply get the new installer and run it once we release it, and you'll get all these new updates. If you don't have the Sim project suite, contact your reseller, your CTC reseller. That's ATG in the US, that's SolidCAD in Canada. Sim project suite is that whole fleet of tools you saw me clicking on in Civil 3D. This was just one tool, Label Genie. There's a whole fleet of tools that are part of the Sim project suite. So check it out. There's standalone licensing, network licensing, very economical to get in your hands. All right, with that, I wish you all a great and safe day. Take care.